I think they're still seeing the world through a lens that was built for them. Have you ever looked through a window in an old cabin or in an old house? It's kind of hazy. It's maybe it's stained or it's dirty or the dirt is so thick on it that it doesn't wash off. Have you ever seen a window like that?
Yeah. My old shed at home when I was a kid growing up.
So you're inside the shed and you're looking out onto a sunny day and you know it's a sunny, beautiful forest on the other side of the window. You know it is, but that's not what you see through the window. I feel like that's how many of our high-achieving brothers and sisters feel. They know it's a sunny forest on the other side, but school and university and working for somebody else and growing their business has created this hazy glass. And you can't trust what you see through the glass. You know that what the glass is showing you isn't real, but you also can't prove it because you can't step outside of the glass. You're inside the shed. So a lot of what I try to do with Everyday Spy is just shatter the glass, because you don't need the glass to be between you and the real world. And that's what it felt like for me when CIA trained me how to be a field officer. I don't feel like they took me out of the shed. I don't feel like they cleaned the glass. I feel like what they did is they just shattered the glass. And there I was looking at the world for what it really was. And it all made sense until I started meeting other people who were still looking through the glass. And there's no way to teach them otherwise, or there's no way to convince them otherwise. The only thing you can do is teach them to break through the barrier themselves.
So that I can understand that, can you tell me what your perspective of the world was before and after the shattered glass?
When I was growing up, all through high school, I went to the Air Force Academy, which is a military school that you have to get accepted on scholarship to go to. Even getting accepted to CIA itself. Every step of the way, I believed that achievement came from doing what you were told better than anybody else so that you could be empirically better than the competition. Like, that's what I believed. But what I found along the way was oftentimes that was true, but oftentimes it wasn't. Sometimes people who had no business being next to me in a race at the Air Force Academy, on the college teams, at the CIA, sometimes the people to my left and to my right had no business being there. They just were the son of somebody influential. They were the daughter of somebody important. They had money, they had opportunity, they were a foreigner. Who knows? But it wasn't always merit-based. But everything had always taught me that it was merit-based, that the best jobs go to the people with the best scores, who go to the best universities. Like, that's what I was taught. But that wasn't really the truth. The richest people weren't the smartest people. The most successful people weren't the hardest workers. And that was when, as a kid even, I started feeling like there's a forest on the other side, but all I see is this picture that doesn't seem to make sense. So then when I got to CIA, and CIA put me through their field tradecraft course, FTC, which is often referred to as the farm, what they did at the field tradecraft course is they said, society is conditioned to believe a certain way, because society needs to be a giant economic machine. We all live inside of a giant machine. We are conditioned through the education process, through the industrial process, through the church process, to fall into a hierarchy that we believe is meritorious, that is a meritocracy, so that hard work and obedience and loyalty gets rewarded. Because the only way that the government stays in power of a large group of people is if there's a predictable system.
Is if they believe there's a system.
And since a system is really nothing more than a belief system, all you have to do to step outside of the system is stop believing, or believe in a different system. So what CIA teaches us to do is find the people who question the system enough that they're open to being taught a different system. And then we teach them the system of espionage or treachery.
So they chose you because you were a bit of a defiant personality or thinker?
I would say...
Or on the cusp of, or potential of being?
I would say it differently, only because defiance as a term by itself means that you just reject everything. Instead, it was more of like a curiosity. I was still very loyal to my country, very loyal to the idea of some sort of authority figure. I was still an individual that had a history of childhood trauma that turned me into a person that needed external validation, but I also chose where that external validation came from. So it was kind of the right amount of trauma to be able to make me loyal to a specific organization. Whereas some people who are truly defiant aren't loyal to anyone, right? They defy everyone.
So the CIA told you that the world is,
Predictable.
but also the way that you explained it made it seem like it was a bit of a conspiracy.
Not a conspiracy, but absolutely a system. A conspiracy means that there's some sort of, a conspiracy insinuates that there's some sort of negative intention.
Mm-hmm.
There is no negative intention. In order for there to be a society at all, in order for there to be structure and lawfulness, there needs to be a system. And in order to create the system, we have to intentionally, continually repeat and program the system. What is a business? A business is nothing more than a series of predictable, reinforced processes and systems that yield a predictable outcome. Why do we think a government is anything different? Why would we think that society is anything different? If you really look at what the church does, if you really look at what Harley Davidson does, it's essentially the same thing. Find people who believe in an ideology, bring them in, give them a framework to believe in that ideology. The church is good and evil, heaven and hell. Harley Davidson is freedom and individuality. And then you just give them a system to think about it. One wears crosses, one wears eagles. One meets on Sundays, one meets on Tuesdays at the local road bar. One goes on, civic duty to collect trash. The other goes on multi-hour road trips. But in all cases, they market to the young, they market to the middle-aged, they market to the very old. Their senior members bring in junior members. They have clubs, they have everything, right? They're two separate subsections of society, which is why we call them subcultures.
So now I understand that there's a system that I'm part of, and it's not malicious in terms of its intent. It just is what it is. It's how the world functions. It's how the country that I'm in operates, and it's required for there to be stability. Now, there's awareness, but is there any benefit in me doing anything about it? Is there anything I can do about it to make my life better?
There's absolutely things that you can do about it. You skipped over the awareness part as if it wasn't substantial. The first thing I would say is awareness of the system is quite a substantial step because most of us are not aware of the system. I was certainly not aware of the system. I suspected something was different. I suspected maybe there was more than I understood. That's the whole idea of looking through faded glass at a clear forest. You know there's a forest, but you don't know how to get there. Mm-hmm. And you don't know why everybody else is standing in the shed if there's a forest right out there. There's just this discomfort because you're like, there should be something more. I feel like there's something more, but everybody seems so happy right here, except me. I'm looking out this window feeling like there's something more. The reality is most people don't look out the window.
What is it that everybody in the shed believes?
That's what's so interesting. I think most people in the shed believe that the shed is a good thing. We need the shed. The shed keeps us warm when it's cold outside. It keeps us cool inside when it's hot outside. It protects us from the rain. It keeps the wind away. We need the shed. That's what most people, I think, start to believe about whatever shed they're born into. I need this church. I need this neighborhood. I need these friends. I need to be popular in school, because everybody else is after the same thing. I need good grades. Why do you think you need good grades? Because my mom said I needed good grades. Well, we don't question it any further than that. We don't question, why do you think your mom thinks you need good grades, right? And then when you look at the hierarchy of society, there's an actual anthropological pyramid that defines society, right? And it breaks into 3 levels. Individualism at the bottom level, tribalism in the center level, and then the state at the top level. Because the most advanced version of society is the state. It maximizes the contribution of each individual by forcing shared policy down all the way from top to bottom. So all people have to obey the state, but in exchange for their obedience, the state provides resources to all people, like clean water and loans and car loans and business loans and police forces and public schools. So we believe that this cabin is needed. It's the best cabin. It's the only cabin.
Is that wrong?
I think if you look at the world as it is, there's a lot of different cabins out there. Our cabin is quite different than the China cabin. The China cabin is quite different than the Russia cabin, right? The UK cabin is very different than the American cabin. So if you follow logic, the fact that different cabins exist at all would suggest that there is no best cabin. And then if there is no best cabin, then do we even need a cabin? Or perhaps there's a different option that's better.
Is there a different option that's better in your opinion?
I haven't found one yet, outside of living in a cabin and being the one that understands there's more. Because then you get all the benefits of the cabin, but you're also the one that knows that sometimes it's worth it to step outside.
Yeah, in your analogy, I was thinking, in fact, it's okay for there to be a cabin because I kind of need there to be a cabin because do you know what I like? Roads and healthcare and police. but if you can be one of the people that realizes you are in a cabin and that the rules of the cabin aren't actually
Your rules.
law, they're just made up rules, then you can bend them in certain ways to live the life that you want to live. And I think in many respects, entrepreneurship is kind of one of those things because some of the narratives that you described there of thinking grades mattered were the narratives that nearly held me back in my life because I was not doing well in school. My brothers were, everyone else was. And I nearly fell into the trap, which you learn in the shed, which is the people that get A's are going to be rich and happy. Mm-hmm. This is the like an unspoken word. And then if you get like an E and a D, you're going to be poor and probably not that happy and probably going to live in a small house and you're probably going to struggle. And that's like a narrative. And through labeling theory, you can come to believe that as the truth and then play that out in your life. But I always think the biggest harm of, and I had a suspicion back then that the biggest harm of getting like an E in my exam was believing that I was an E. And they're two very different things. Like I can get an E, but it doesn't make me an E. But in the shed, it does make you an E. It's hard to...
Because everybody else labels you by what you perform inside the shed that defines them.
And then I self-label. I then start to tell myself in my self-esteem that I am an E grade. And then I show up like an E grade, which they've proven through labeling theory. You can tell someone they're something, or you can remind them of a stereotype that applies to them, and they'll immediately perform worse on a test, whatever that stereotype relates to. So, but entrepreneurship for me was saying, do you know what? I'm going to leave school, I'm going to drop out of university, and I'm going to try and like send a bunch of emails and figure out life myself outside of the system, because the system was never going to get me where I needed to go. If I had followed the system, I would still be working in the call center that I was when I was 19, you know, and basically have no free time, working till midnight at night and just getting shit from a boss that was an asshole to me.
And you just described the feeling of 80% of the population. They feel like they've never gone past the call center that they worked at when they were 19. The vast majority of people out there feel like they stopped developing at about 27.
What is the difference, though? What is the difference between the people that kind of get out the shed and pursue their dreams and build the business or whatever, and the people that are still in the call center? I'm not saying call centers are bad. Listen, I learned a lot of skills from call centers that I loved, but it sucked compared to what I do now. What is the first? So the first thing you're talking about is shattering the glass.
The first thing is awareness.
Yeah.
You have to be aware
that you're in a shed.
That you're in a shed. And you have to be aware that you're choosing to be in the shed, right? You can always leave. This is an argument I have so often with people who are trapped in the wrong mindset, right? I don't even know what the right psychological term is because I don't live in a world of academic psychology. But there are people who believe that they don't have a choice. And in the United States, for example, we have 50 states. There are some people in the state of Florida who feel like they can't leave the state of Florida.
Because?
They think it's because they don't have enough money. They think it's because the drive is too far. There isn't a support network on the other side. The bureaucratic hurdles of trying to change your residency and get a new driver's license is too much. The taxes are too high to pay to move from a non-tax state to a state tax state. So they all have reasons, and the reasons are grounded in fact, but the value that they put on the fact, the value of the challenge is greater than the value of the reward in their point of view, in their perspective. And in reality, it's the other way around.
You just reminded me of a video that changed my life. I'm going to play this video for you, okay? It's a very, very short video, but when you talked about people living in a state or living in a situation where they don't think they can leave, this video came to mind. They just get an ant, and you can do this with basically any small creature, and you get a biro or a pen and just draw a circle around it, and it will not leave the circle. And I watched this video many years ago of just this ant trapped in the circle, and the guy drawing the circle around the ant just makes the circle smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay, so left there. And it will basically remain trapped. And it was when I watched it, I thought, I'm doing that for myself in my own life. So the ant remains trapped, they make it smaller. The ant won't leave the circle. But what's interesting here, right, is the ant is eventually figuring out
that it's just a circle.
That it's just a circle. That it's like just a shed. And when I saw that, the first thing I asked myself was, in what ways have I drawn an imaginary circle around myself?
I think the more important question is oftentimes, when did the imaginary circle start? Who drew the first circle? Because it wasn't you. If you've ever seen a child, if you've ever seen an infant, a toddler, they are limitless. They know no bounds. They don't understand anything about the world around them. They don't know how their body feels, so they don't know whether they're hungry or whether they're gassy or whether they're urinating. They cry at everything, and they're constantly squirming. They have no context. So all the context that they gain through absorption. We create the context for them. We create the idea of this is bedtime. We create the idea of this is what a healthy habit is, brushing your teeth, washing your hands, whatever else. We create this is home, and this is where you can walk around openly. But once you go out this door into the front yard is not home anymore. And now you can't go anywhere you want. You have to stay here. So somewhere somebody started drawing circles before we ever drew them. All we started doing was then believing that the circles were more permanent than they really were.
And the way to understand that it's not permanent is to step out. But stepping out does two things to us simultaneously. One, it feels uncomfortable because nobody else is stepping out. And two, it feels wrong. Why does it feel wrong? Because we've been conditioned to believe we have to stay in the circle. This is why I love my company. This is why I love our mission of teaching spy skills to break barriers. Because everybody loves the idea of a spy. But when you think about what a spy does, nobody actually likes what a spy does. Nobody likes the fact that spies steal. Nobody likes the fact that spies lie. But for some reason, they still like the idea of a spy. And that's why James Bond and Jason Bourne and spy shows are so popular. What's happening is we come into this place where what we want and what we're told we're supposed to want clash. Because you know what we really want is an opportunity. And we want an opportunity so bad that we're willing to cheat to get the opportunity. But we don't want to admit that we're willing to cheat to get the opportunity. We want an advantage, but we don't want to believe that our advantage hurts other people. So somehow we want to all move forward with equanimity, and everybody does better. And that's just not the way that anything in nature actually works. And what entrepreneurs figure out when they're successful is that you can cheat and you can get away with cheating. And when you get away with cheating, it just gives permission to everybody else who was too afraid to cheat. And then you have first mover advantage in the marketplace and they copy you. And all of a sudden that isn't cheating anymore. And cheating because cheating can, it's a bit of a loaded word, right? What do you mean when you talk about cheating in the context of business?
I'm talking about like an unfair advantage of any sort, right? Think about do you remember when MP3s first came out?
Yes. Well, I had one when I was a kid.
So an MP3 player.
Yeah.
So MP3s, as in music files. Mm-hmm. I remember when they first came out, it was, the market went chaotic because you could get them off of the internet for free, which meant that the musicians didn't get paid for it. And that turned into, I think it was called Napster.
Yeah, LimeWire, yeah.
Yeah, there were so many of these different databases where you could just pull free music, and it was crazy. Before that, there were CDs. There was even a brief period where there were mini discs, right? People just kept making improvements. We call them disruptors now because we found a way to glorify the word cheat and make it into something good. So now there's disruptors. But all they were doing was taking advantage of something that other people weren't taking advantage of, a new form of technology. Well, how did they get access to a new form of technology? Because they got investors. Well, how did they get investors? They knew a guy who knew a guy. They shook a hand. Dad at the golf club, maybe. they had 5 minutes with the right guy on the right elevator? Who knows? But the people who don't get investors look at the people who do get investors and say, that's not fair. That's just the way it is. That's the way life is. You know what's not fair? It's not fair that some people are born into a house where the cabin, where the shed that they're born into is a $300,000 a year shed. And other people are born into a shed that's a $30,000 a year shed. That's not fair. Nothing is fair. So once you accept that nothing is fair, that also means there isn't really anything that's unfair. You can do whatever you need to improve yourself and your life.
So I'm in the shed. And I've listened to you, so I've realized that I am in a shed, and that the rules I've been conditioned to believe aren't necessarily, they're rules, but they're breakable rules. And I have every right to break them. What do you think is step one beyond there, beyond the awareness?
I'm going to give you two answers, because there's the reality of the answer, but then there's my preferred response, right? The reality of the answer is the reality is that most people have already thought about what I'm saying. I'm just giving words and authenticity and credibility to what they already believe. So they're ready for the next step, and they just jump right in. They believe me. I appreciate it when people believe me, but I don't want people to believe me. What I want people to do is my preferred approach, which is to test the information. Test what I'm saying. Learn a framework that we teach at Everyday Spy. Learn a framework that you and I talk about. Put it into exercise. If it works, you just tested something. Now you can believe something. Now you can change your mindset and change your framework. But too often, people just believe. I appreciate it when they believe me. It makes me feel good, but it's not what I'm trying to teach people to do. What I want people to do is actually test it. Test it. And because if they test it, they make it their own. Here's the problem with every teacher I've ever had, with the exception of 2 or 3. They tell you something is the facts. And then you know that at the end of the week, you have to take a quiz on what they told you was the facts. And then you know that at the end of the semester, you have to take an exam on what they told you was the facts. They don't ever teach you to test or question the facts. And we know at our age and our success level that history is written by the winners, but there's always two sides to history. And then when you think about the political, the religious, the personal ramifications of everything that happens, you realize there's multiple different versions of truth. There may only be one fact, but there's multiple versions of truth. So we're not even conditioned to learn to question the truth to find the fact. Instead, we're just taught that the truth that we're taught is the facts. And that's how we end up in a world like we have today, where people can say whatever they want to say and people believe them, instead of testing what you hear to see if it really is worth transitioning or transforming your belief system.
It sounds like you're making a distinction between like knowledge and belief.
What we call information and knowledge. Exactly right.
So information is what someone might say to you, but then knowledge is what you actually know to be true.
Correct. There's a flywheel that we have in the intelligence world, and it's a triangle. And the top of the triangle is information. Mm-hmm. And then information flows into knowledge, and then knowledge flows into experience. So what happens is you learn information. From that information, you develop knowledge. And then you test that knowledge through experience. And what happens when you go out and take action in an experience? You get more information, which yields more knowledge, which you test through experience, which yields more information. And you have this very positive flywheel. That's how the intelligence cycle works. But what happens in society, what happens in a state system that requires people to become predictable and obedient and respectful and collegial, is they skip the experience part. They say, this is information, this is knowledge, and here's more new information, and here's more new knowledge. And they never give people the opportunity to test the knowledge for themselves.
So I'm breaking out the shed, and I'm going to try and test some of this information that I'm going to learn today and in this conversation. What is a good example of something that you've seen in your practice when working with people at the Everyday Spy has helped someone to change their life, like a framework that typically helps people to change their life in the most profound way as it relates to business, sales, their career, whatever?
One of the ones that jumps to mind right away is it's a simple framework about perspective versus perception. Mm-hmm. And we may have mentioned this actually in our previous conversation, Stephen. Perception is what you believe to be true about the world around you. Perspective is what other people believe to be true about the world around them. So as I sit here looking at you, this is my perception. My perception is that I'm sitting in the center seat and you're sitting outside of me and everything else is built around me at the center. Well, guess what your perception is? The same thing. I'm across the table from you, you're at the center, and everything in this room is built around you. So our perceptions are never going to be the same. So the only way that I can find common ground with you is to stop thinking about what's happening around me from my perception and start thinking from your perspective. Because then I get my perception plus your perception combined. I get twice as much information to think through this specific situation.
Can you train that? Can you train someone to
Absolutely.
have both points of view?
Absolutely. So here's how I mentioned that awareness is the first step, right? Really, we have a 3-step process at CIA that we use when we teach spy skills to future spies, because that's all CIA is. CIA is a giant training engine that's constantly creating new spies. And then spies just go out and spy. But what CIA really does is train spies who then steal secrets and combine and compile those secrets to share with decision makers on the Hill, right? CIA's system of teaching is a system where you educate first, you exercise second, and then you experience third. Remember that flywheel. So you educate, that's your information. You exercise, that's where you turn information into knowledge. And then you experience, and that's where you actually go out and test the knowledge to see if the knowledge is still applicable in the world that you live in today. So those are the 3 steps. So whenever you're trying to get anyone to break a barrier, whenever you're trying to get anyone to transform, all you have to do is educate them, help them to exercise, which means practice what they learned in a controlled space, and then kick them out the door to go do it for themselves. It's like kicking a bird out of the nest.
So can you make this very real for me? Because I want to be someone that can walk through the world and appreciate my perception of a situation, but also the other person's perspective. So if we just put this in the context of me here as a podcast host, how would I be able to implement this to become a better podcast host? Like understand the other person's perspective and the way that you're seeing the world.
Absolutely. So we had a whole conversation before the cameras turned on.
Yeah.
Right? Can you tell me 5 things that you remember about me that I shared during the time before the cameras turned on?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. You want me to say them? Because
Yeah,
we're talking
absolutely.
about...
It's private stuff, but tell me.
Okay. We're talking about your relationship, things you're going through at home. You said that in the last couple of days, everything's changed because of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. We talked about you used to live in an RV for a while, and you've just recently moved across America to a new place. You mentioned your kids as well.
Give me specifics.
Oh God. You said that you used to live in the RV with your kids, and they're varying ages. I think one of them is, did you say 3 years old?
Close.
One of them was
Young
3 years
children.
old or something.
5 and 1 when
5
we lived in
and
the
1.
RV.
Shit, yeah, 5 and
It's
1.
okay. You did great, right? Those things that you recalled. You recalled those from what's known as your paleomammalian brain, the back part of your brain, passive learning part of your brain. Because naturally, when you're untrained to think like a spy, you rely on passive knowledge. You rely on passive observation to create prefrontal cortex knowledge. All a spy does is when they talk to you, they turn on. They turn on the prefrontal part right away, and they start paying attention to all the details right away. Because the way that you gain someone else's perspective is by listening to what they're saying and seeing how they're saying it. Because what happens now when I sit with people, I was just with a client this morning who made a comment on this. When you're trained and you sit with someone, you are always gaining more information about them than they are about you. When you know how to practice perspective versus perception. Because from the moment that you came in and sat down, you were very much in your world. You're sitting here in socks, you're sitting on your leg, you're very comfortable, you're messing with all of your technology, you're fighting with your technology because it's not exactly the way you want it to be. Like this is Steve's world. And there's not a single thing wrong with Steve's world. But Steve's world isn't as big as the world of Steve and Andy together. Whereas when I came in here, just because of the way I'm wired, I'm paying attention to you. I'm paying attention to your producers. I'm paying attention to the set. I'm paying attention to the people who I've met from your team in previous calls, because I'm trying to gain as much perspective as possible before I sit at this table with you and the cameras turn on and we're on a one-way trip. Because I only get one chance. So I want to have as much information on my side moving forward. So you as a podcast host, your original question was, how do I use this information? How do I use these frameworks to become a better podcast host? Every person who sits across the table from you came from somewhere. And every time they leave the table you're sitting at, they're going somewhere. And they're bringing stress and they're bringing pain and they're bringing worries and they're bringing concerns with them. And they're leaving with the same things.
Mm-hmm.
I know that your partner is thinking about babies.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about it, that's how you talk about it. You say, my partner is thinking about getting pregnant. You don't ever say, we're thinking about getting pregnant, which makes me wonder if she's more excited about pregnancy than you are.
I'm so fucked. Oh, pray the Lord she doesn't listen to this.
Am I accurate?
So can I match her excitement levels? She's changed the entire house at home. It's like she's expecting, I don't know, but like my shampoo is gone. That's like her level of excitement about it. So obviously I'm excited about it, but no, of course I can't match her level of like preparation and obsession about it. No, yeah.
But I'm paying attention to you, and that's the only reason I even have the ability to ask that question, right? Because I'm coming in and I'm trying to live in your shoes. The whole time I'm here, I'm trying to live in your shoes. Even as I answer your questions, I'm trying to think, what can I do to bring value to Steve, to the Diary of a CEO, to the audience that's listening? Because this is my only time to talk to you guys. So what can I do to maximize that value? That's practicing perspective. So when you do that to your guests, you're going to unlock a whole new level of podcasting from them. Instead of being frustrated or curious or wondering whether or not they're on track or off track, or whether or not they're tired or not tired, or whether or not you're going to get the best performance out of them, if you literally just we have an exercise. We have an exercise called Get Quiet at CIA. And in a Get Quiet exercise, all you do is just get quiet. You stop overwhelming your sensatory organs, your eyes, your ears, your feelings, your taste buds, your nose, your olfactory. You get yourself into a place where your sensory organs can take a break. Because what happens when you don't overload your sensory organs is your brain starts to index. And when your brain starts to index, it gives you a higher level of awareness, a higher level of observational skills. So especially before you go into an area where you want to make observations, you want to quiet your sensory organs so that you can go in with fresh sensory organs. It's kind of like cleaning your palate before you try a certain ice cream, right? The reason that we do that is because we want to gain as much perspective information as possible so that we have the informational advantage going into any situation. Understanding that most people are coming in living in their own perception. Consider applying this to business, right? You are a coffee shop. Well, there's 500 other coffee shops. There's 5 other coffee shops just in 2 square miles of where your coffee shop is. So when you think about your own product, you think, well, my coffee is superior. It's from Ethiopia, we roast it here and it smells great and whatever else. Or you think, my building is better because we have local artists on the wall and we play local musicians, right? Like that's what they think. That's what the owner of the coffee shop thinks. But they don't stop to think about the customer who buys the coffee. Because the customer who buys the coffee is coming from somewhere and then going to somewhere. And the coffee shop is just one stop along the way. So if you really want to become the coffee shop that everybody wants to go to, you have to think about life through their eyes, through their perspective. Why are they drinking the coffee? Oh, they're drinking the coffee because they're a new mom. So then what else does a new mom need? What else does a new mom want when she goes to a coffee shop? Maybe she wants other moms to be there. Maybe she wants specials. Maybe she wants to find little things to buy her kids. Who knows what? You can change your shop to fit your customer if you're open to their perspective. Otherwise, all you're doing is creating your own little circle, your own little shed.
So in terms of practical things that you do so that you can really tune into someone's perspective, is the most important one just listening?
Yes, but there's a twist because you also have to dig for the information you want. So you have to know how to ask questions. And you have to be willing to ask questions. There's another exercise that we have at CIA called windows and doors. In a conversation, people will open windows in conversation, which means I might ask you one thing or you might ask me something, and then in my response, I hint at something else. That's a window, right? You started this conversation by asking me, what season of my life am I in? that was a fantastic question to open windows and doors, because you don't know what the answer is, but you're going to choose what you hear to decide where you go next. The same thing happens in a normal conversation, right? You can see windows and doors when they present themselves. When you are trying to cultivate perspective over somebody, you want to choose the windows and doors that you follow through in the conversation specifically to collect the kind of information that you want to gain that perspective. So if I'm trying to sell something to you, as an entrepreneur, I'm going to follow the windows and doors that open up in conversation that take me to understand better what limitations or challenges you're having as an entrepreneur.
So if you're a car salesman and I'm a customer and I want to buy a car, what kind of questions would you start asking me to?
I love this exercise because I actually just had to buy a car after we moved.
Really?
And I was shocked at how horrible my car salesman was, because he did not think this way, right? Why do people buy a car? I'm going to let you practice your perspective on me. When I moved to Colorado Springs in May, why did I have to buy a car?
Because you have kids.
Nope.
You have 2 kids. Oh, because you have to. Well, you mentioned Colorado Springs, so I guess that's pretty pertinent to your answer. But you have to travel a lot around Colorado because it's quite vast, isn't it?
You need a mode of transportation. Mm-hmm. That's the only reason anybody buys a car. That's where you have to start, because then you have to think, well, why are they here? If you're a Subaru dealership and somebody walks in, you already know that they've pre-qualified a number of things. They must be looking for a Subaru. Mm-hmm. They must be looking for a 2-wheel car. They must be looking for an all-wheel car, or else they wouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of make those assumptions if you practice perspective when they walk in. And then when they walk in, that's when you find out, oh, they're a parent. So I'm looking for a mode of transportation that's also safe, because I'm a parent. I have a family of 4, so I'm looking for a mode of transportation that's safe for at least 4 people. If you practice a little bit of perspective, you learn a lot more about the person that you're trying to close. So now I ended up buying a Nissan Pathfinder, a brand new Nissan Pathfinder. Not because my salesman was any good, but because I went to the Nissan dealership already wanting a brand new Pathfinder, just like you did. Mm-hmm. But I always go through this experience to see what's the salesperson going to do? Like, are they going to try to sell me something good? Are they going to try to sell me something wrong? Are they going to understand my specific needs? Or am I going to have to coach them through this whole thing? My company gets hired to give sales training to high-performance sales teams. And what I'm shocked at is how often, even with a high-performing sales team, salespeople don't practice perspective and perception. What they practice is whatever script they're supposed to read. And they practice empirical numbers, and they practice the law of averages. And it's like, I need to make 100 calls to convert 12%. Mm-hmm. That's what they practice, instead of practicing something just a little bit more efficient, like changing your opening line to ask an open-ended question, just like you did. An open-ended question is a question that makes the person on the other side of the phone speak through the lens of their current reality.
Do you know what? I've never said this before, but there's a question I ask every guest in the preamble. And I don't know if I asked you, but I ask 99% of guests when we sit down, and it's what's front of mind for you at the moment. And for me, the reason I ask that question is because kind of what you said, because people come here, and I assume that there's something that happened when they woke up this morning, or there's something that's bugging them that my research team wouldn't have been able to find on the internet, that they haven't yet said in an interview. And it's been so unbelievably amazing when you ask that question. And then there was one particular conversation I had, which was one of my favorite of all time, where it was with Simon Sinek. And because I've spoken to Simon Sinek 3 times on the podcast, I didn't have research. We've talked about everything. So I sat down and I had to sit down and figure out where the conversation was going to go for the next 3 hours. And so my opening question to him was really broad. It was, how are you? And please give me the long answer. And you have to be honest. And he literally, for the first time ever in his life, went, do you know what? I'm feeling really lonely right now. And for him to say that, a guy like that to say that, was like, whoa. And if I had sat down with today we're going to talk about management strategies, I totally would have missed one of my favorite conversations of all time. But you have to have a lot of trust in yourself. This is what I've come to learn as a podcaster, to be able to sit down without any questions written down here and to ask a really open-ended question and then to try and follow them, wherever they might take you.
Well, that's what's interesting is that one of your superpowers as a podcaster is that you have a plan, but you don't always stick rigidly to your plan. You go wherever the guest takes you. You go where Simon Sinek takes you, right? I've taken you down this long path about living in a shed that I'm sure was not on your agenda. And I'm sure lost a good half of the people that we were talking to early on. But my point with all of that is just to say, you practice what is called courage. And courage is a word that is definable. And people don't often take the time to really define what courage is. Courage is doing the thing that you're afraid of. That is courage. So going off script and asking a question, coming in unprepared for a podcast, those are things that cause you a little bit of fear, a little bit of anxiety. You're like, I don't know how this is going to turn out, but you do it anyways. One of the major differences between entrepreneurs and aspirational entrepreneurs is that entrepreneurs have the courage to try, and aspirational entrepreneurs are always talking about the day that they will have the courage to try.
Trust comes into this, right? Because part of the reason that I can sit down with someone for 3 hours and not necessarily I've never had a question written down, but not even have an idea of where the conversation is going to go, is because I have so many case studies that it's been fine in the past. And it's those case studies that have built up this sort of self-trust that enables me to sit down and go, how are you? And then they go off about loneliness, and we spend 3 hours talking about loneliness. But that comes from that initial trust, I think.
I think trust is a good word. Trust is
self-trust. I'm trying to,
yeah, self-trust or confidence.
Yeah.
Those are good words to use, but I would almost challenge that what you're really talking about is you're gambling on odds that you've learned are in your favor, right? It's kind of like when you think about a professional athlete. Professional athletes do some amazing movements. Sometimes they make the score and sometimes they don't. But what happens is when they make the score doing an amazing movement, that's what we all remember. When they miss the shot doing the amazing movement, nobody remembers that. Right? Nobody remembers how many basketball shots Dennis Rodman didn't make, right? They just remember something else about Dennis Rodman. Arnold Schwarzenegger has this famous quote where he made lots of movies. We all remember our favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. But how many of his bad movies do you remember? Not many. And he knows that too. And that's one of the reasons that he said yes to so many movies, was because he learned early on in his bodybuilding career that nobody remembers when you lose, but they always remember when you win. So he had no problem making a bunch of movies because the 1 or 2 or 3 or 12 or 18 that became blockbusters were the ones that defined him, even though he also did Kindergarten Cop.
I mean, that's quite a good concept to hold in your mind if you're trying to weigh up any sort of risk in your life, like the risk of leaving the shed that we were talking about.
Correct. You're taking a chance, you're taking a gamble. But here's the thing. We're conditioned in our shed, we're conditioned to gamble on the system, right? If you're going to roll the dice, at least roll the dice that the system gives you, right? Bet on the house because the house is going to win. What we really learn as entrepreneurs is to gamble on ourselves. Like, bet on you. How many people take every dollar they earn and they invest it in a brokerage that's managed by somebody else that is targeting an 8% return on investment? That's what they do with every dollar of their life. My mother-in-law just recently retired about 3.5 or 4 weeks ago. She is, what do you have to be to retire? 69, I think. So she's 67 or 68 years old. She's worked her entire life. Her primary investment vehicles, I shit you not, are CDs. It's a device in the investment world where you basically put your money in for a certain amount of time and it guarantees you a certain yield. And that yield is usually very, very low. But that was her preferred investment vehicle. So for the 69 years or the 50 years that she's been working, she's been investing in these low performance certificates of deposit, CD. That is exactly the kind of thinking that was conditioned into her by the generation before her. That's where she learned about CDs at all. That's why she bought her first CD at 16 years old, was because mom and dad told her to do that. So here it is, 2024, she's retiring, and all of the money that she saved is basically in these certificates of deposit, which is not a lot of money.
Really?
Yes, because it doesn't grow. Whereas I invest in my company, and my return has been 300%. And entrepreneurs, even entrepreneurs who don't grow quickly, still see 12% return on investment, 15% return on investment, 20% return on investment, which outperforms anything in the market. But you still have these people who don't want to gamble on themselves because they're afraid that the House will win.
Who can't be taught the things that you teach in terms of the CIA skills and everything you teach with an everyday spy?
There's a lot of people out there who right out of the gates had a circle drawn around them that CIA is some kind of deep state conspiracy, kills Americans, sells children, steals drugs kind of organization.
Are they wrong?
Maybe there was a CIA that did that once. But my point is, those people are never going to believe what I have to teach them. There are threads all over the internet about how I'm a fake and a phony and a fraudster. And there's for every one of those threads, there are also threads that talk about how I'm a plant, how I'm still a CIA officer.
I did read that in the comment section.
Isn't that funny?
I find it quite funny.
So there's both sides. These are people who they'll never be open to learn. They're not willing to learn.
How do I know you're not still a CIA officer?
Doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't matter. If you can take the information and test the framework and get ahead, does it matter?
Well, actually, maybe if okay, you're at the right point now. You said, test it myself. Because you could be teaching me things that are going to just keep me trapped in the matrix because,
But I don't want you trapped in the matrix.
But I don't know that. You could still be a CIA spy.
I could be.
But the key thing you said is that you're giving them to me to test for myself. So I get the results to check whether what you're teaching me is positive or negative, productive or not productive.
Correct. And that's what really drives me. What drives me is this vision of a future that's good for my children. And the future that's good for my children is a future where the United States is still the most powerful economy in the world, still the most powerful military in the world. And according to all reports, that is not what will happen by 2035. By 2035, we will be at parity with at least another country, most likely China. And as we reach parity, what that means is you reach equality. As you reach equality, your superpower status goes away. You are no longer a superpower, you are a near-peer power or a near-peer competitor. It's very different than being a superpower.
Why does it matter?
Because when there's competition, there's more uncertainty, there's more unpredictability, there's more danger, there's more risk, there's less opportunity. Think about the starting quarterback for a football team. He's the starting quarterback. He is the person. He is the player that will start the game, that will have the football, and nobody questions it. There's a lot of opportunity there for that person. But as soon as they start to be unpredictable, as soon as there's a new star, a new quarterback that comes in and threatens the existing quarterback, now we don't really know who's going to start. And the team doesn't really know who's going to start. And then for all we know, the team is going to have two different quarterbacks that swap in and out throughout the entire game, and the whole team performs worse because they don't know how to predict the quarterback, because the new quarterback or the old quarterback isn't the one that's always throwing the ball. So there's an uncertainty that comes as competition arises. It's why business owners want to be in a business of one. It's why there's such a thing as a blue ocean marketing strategy versus a red ocean marketing strategy. Because when you're in a blue ocean, when you have no competitors around you, your business will most likely thrive. You have room to make mistakes. You can learn slowly. But when you're in a highly competitive red ocean, you don't get any of those opportunities.
What does history tell us about how the changing of the guard as it relates to world power, what the dangers might be for the average person?
It's a great question, and this is where I want to re-emphasize my lack of altruism, right? Because
what does altruism mean for anyone that doesn't know?
So altruism is this idea that you care about other people or that you care about a common good, right? I don't care about a common good.
Do you care about other people?
I care about some other people.
Your children?
Correct. My family, my friends, the people that I think are making a difference. Mm-hmm. And that's just the way it is. Why will some people not be willing to learn what I teach them? Because they will disagree with my ethics and my morals about how I don't care about all people equally.
Well, I like the fact that you're honest. So, I mean, that makes me trust you more. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So if you look at history, Rome was really good for Romans for a long, long time. The fall of Rome was bad for everybody. The transition was bad for everybody. Coming out of World War II, right? When you were a Nazi in Nazi Germany, things were pretty good, right? But then when Nazi Germany fell, it was bad for a lot of people. There was a lot of war. There was a lot of death. There was a lot of starvation. Multiple countries had been destroyed. There was a war. There was a transition of power. Same thing happened at the fall of the Soviet Union.
In that war, I was watching a documentary about it the other day. It was interesting because I watched both the sort of Soviet Union rush into Berlin and I watched America rushed into Berlin. They both took different parts of Germany. And then once they'd taken down the Nazis, they kind of went to war with each other.
Correct.
Because they then were trying to figure out who was in charge of Germany and how they were going to divvy up land. So there was another war, basically, like a civil war following the
And the same thing happened in China. The same thing happened as our Pacific forces kind of worked their way up through Japan. There became conflict in the East as well, right? So transition periods where near-peer countries or where countries become near-peer competitors, that's not, people don't stop competing as the competition increases. Like what's happening in the world right now in Ukraine and Russia, in Israel with Hamas, with the Houthis and with the Iranians, like what's happening is competition is on the rise. So everything becomes less stable. Things become more dangerous. When there's a clear bully in the playground, there's only one bully and nobody has to mess with the bully. And it's a bad day for anyone the bully messes with, but for the most part, everybody else is good. But what happens when there's two bullies? Shit gets messy. The bullies make posses. The posses have to fight with each other. More people get hurt. More rabble-rousing happens in the playground than when there's just one bully. So for me, the United States is the bully on the playground. And I, as an American citizen, am living in a place where it's pretty good to be on the bully's side. So for me, pragmatically speaking, if I want the best for my children, what I really need is for the United States to remain the only bully. So then I can have some impotence, some confidence that their future will be secure.
Do you think the war in the Ukraine and Russia is a symptom of the changing in power? Because it's kind of like a proxy war, right? You've got Ukraine is actually the USA and Russia is actually kind of China to some degree.
So I would say it's not kind of a proxy war. It's a full-on proxy war. You're 100% right.
I don't even know what a proxy war is. I just use that term because it sounded smart.
Well, it does sound smart. It is smart. Proxy war is a doctrine. It's an actual military doctrine that says that you create what's known as intrastate conflict, which means conflict internal to a state, and then external wealth parties fund the conflict in the state. That way, the two external parties that are in conflict don't have to waste any lives. It protects them diplomatically, it protects them socially, it protects them militarily. They're only spending resources in an interstate conflict. The interstate conflict has always been inside Ukraine. Eastern Ukraine and Western Ukraine have always been in conflict. We just didn't realize it until Russia invaded because nobody paid attention to Ukraine. Same thing in Israel. There's always been conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis. We just didn't really pay attention to it until October 8th. So the conflict that you're talking about is not a symptom, it's a strategy. And the strategy is that the United States can drain Russian resources without draining American lives, which makes it easy for the United States to continue draining strategic resources from Russia. And then NATO's watching the same thing happen, and NATO's the one that has the most to lose if Russia is strong, so then that's why they also pile in support. That's the strategy. That has been the United States strategy since the end of World War II. Who rebuilt Japan? The United States. Who rebuilt the UK? The United States. Who rebuilt Germany? Who rebuilt France? All the United States. Is it any surprise that all of these countries since World War II have then been close diplomatic, political, and economic allies? No. And guess what they all have? They all have very similar sheds because we built their political systems from World War II based on ours, right? That's the American model. That's been how America has grown economically so quickly all over the world. Guess who's mimicking that model now? China. The real conflict between the United States and China, nobody can define it. Trump calls it a trade war because we have a bunch of cheap Chinese goods. That's not the problem. The problem is that Xi Jinping understands that what he wants for China is for China to be a net exporter of high technology. Who's the only other net exporter of high technology? The United States. The United States makes electric vehicles, China makes electric vehicles. The United States makes telecommunication, China makes telecommunication. That's the conflict, because what China is doing is giving the rest of the developing world an alternative to the United States. Well, if just like any other business, if I make coffee and you make coffee, we're in competition for the person who wants to buy coffee. So now we're fighting over that person. Whoever wins that person wins more money. Whoever wins that person wins repeat buyers. And now I might lose my company. My coffee shop might shrink and your coffee shop might grow because this person is choosing your coffee when it used to be only mine was available.
So, who is better for America? Joe Biden or Donald Trump?
Neither. They are both bad for America in different ways.
Who is more likely to prolong American dominance?
Donald Trump of the two. Donald Trump of the two. Here's what I'm going to tell you. I had this thought last night, and I was going to make it a video for my own channel, but my channel is nowhere near as enjoyable as your channel.
I'll put it on yours as well.
There is only one Democrat in the United States who can beat Donald Trump. Only one. Nobody else stands a chance. Democratic Party is struggling to accept that. Nobody can beat Donald Trump. There's only one that can win, and that's Michelle Obama.
I did think this, because, I mean, I would say Barack, but obviously he can't because he's done his 8 years. But Michelle, I do agree, and she doesn't want anything to do with it.
She said in early July, she wanted nothing to do with it. But what's happened since early July? There's been the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. The assassination attempt turned into this incredible media frenzy. Now you have this guy with blood on his face and a fist in the air and a flag behind him. You have a Pulitzer Prize winning photo already floating around the internet with this guy on it, right? Everything changed. There's no way Michelle Obama isn't sitting in her room multiple times a day, asking herself the question, do I still want nothing to do with this? Or do I have to step up to the plate to do what I believe is the right thing to do because only I can do it? Think about the questions Barack Obama must ask Michelle Obama. Think about the silence, the pregnant silence around their kitchen table at night. Think about how heavy they must be thinking right now because they know what I just said out loud, that you knew yesterday. There's only one Democrat that can beat Donald Trump. And maybe in July 3rd, she said she wanted nothing to do with it, but now it's July 20th. And if she really believes in this country, how is she not going to rise to the occasion? How is she going to sit back and let the future of her daughters rest in the hands of somebody she doesn't believe in? Because the truth is, if she were to run overnight, she would have the complete support of the entire Democratic National Convention. Every donor who has already donated money would let their money stay with her and probably donate more. Women voters, African-American voters, voters that are on the fence, voters that are looking for any alternative to Donald Trump or Joe Biden, they would all get their answers given to them at once. Not to mention the fact that she's brilliant, she's esteemed, she's youthful, like everything that America stands for is represented in Michelle Obama just as much as what we say America stands for is represented by Donald Trump. So if Michelle Obama is announced at the Democratic National Convention, I'm glad we had this conversation.
Do you think that's possible?
Absolutely, it's possible. I don't think it's probable,
Okay.
but I do think it's possible. And I can't help but have the hope in our country that the few who are willing to learn will step up and accept that they have to gamble on themselves.
Do you think that Michelle Obama would increase the probability and the length of America's dominance versus Trump?
Absolutely. It would just be in a different way. Donald Trump grows through bravado and brinksmanship. He grows like a bully grows. But what we've learned about the United States is that our bullish strategy, our bully strategy that we've been employing since 1950 is a game of diminishing returns. We invest a lot into it, but we lose influence. We lose global reach. We lose power. We're losing economic might. They say that China's having an economic recession right now at 4.5% growth GDP. We're at 1.3% growth GDP. Nobody's talking about our recession because our recession has been on so long, it's not a recession anymore. It's just the United States doesn't grow more than really 3%. China used to grow at 5%. So when it goes from 5% to 4%, it's a big deal for people. Our model is already broken. Our model already doesn't work. So all Donald Trump is going to do is come in and double down on that model because he's only got 4 years in the House. He's only got 4 years in the White House, and he knows it. So He's not out there to revolutionize America. He's not out there to revolutionize the United States. Like, he's out there for Donald Trump. I think he believes he'll do a good job. I think he believes he's best for America. I think he believes that being a bully is the way to go. But that doesn't mean he's right. That doesn't mean it's going to be exponential return on investment. It could be a continuing game of diminishing returns. Michelle Obama has the opportunity to do it differently, as long as she doesn't come in just parroting the Joe Biden and Barack Obama school of thought.
What do you think she would need to say to meet America's ideology right now?
I think she could define America's ideology right now. I don't think she'd have to meet it. I think America is lost. America has been looking down the barrel of the 2024 election for a long time, knowing it was going to boil down to Trump versus Biden, knowing that it was going to boil down to an octogenarian who can't form a sentence from a stage sometimes, or a crazy-ass businessman who, when he forms a sentence, it's a nonsensical sentence. Like, that's what we've been looking at. That's been the choice.
It doesn't really feel like it's a choice anymore. No, because after Trump got shot in the ear, I think, I watched those scenes as well, and I thought, yeah, this guy's won.
He won. And and everybody knows it. If you're not willing to admit it, that's fine. Everybody knows he won the election on that day. The day he survived that shooting in Butler, Pennsylvania, July 13th, he won the 2024 election, unless something even more disruptive happens in the marketplace between now and November 5th. Michelle Obama has the power to do that.
If you were in his marketing team and you were desperate, you would have shot him in the ear that day, wouldn't you? No way. The risk is too great. I mean, if you knew it was going to hit his ear and you were in his marketing team, you would have shot him in the ear that day. Like, if because that was, as we both said, he won the election that day.
Yeah.
And he won the election because many people will now see him as some kind of hero.
So I'll tell you how a CIA officer thinks about this, right? If you wanted to stage an attempted assassination, if that's what you want to do, is stage an attempted assassination, you would never shoot at the person who was the principal. You would shoot away. You'd shoot up in the sky. The principal is the primary target that you're trying to support, right? So Donald Trump was the principal. If I was trying to stage an assassination to win him popular praise, I would not shoot at him, because the risk is too great that the shot would either miss and hit him, possibly hit him fatally, or it would miss him and hit someone in the audience, and then a rally member dies, and now we have to account for why somebody at the rally died. Like, people were killed and people were hurt at the Donald Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. If you wanted to stage an assassination, you would shoot 35, 40 degrees off target, well away from anybody accidentally getting hit, because what's going to happen? Everybody's going to hear the gunshots. So the gunshots will still cause the panic. The Secret Service would still jump in. They'd still cover him. There'd still be all the same newsworthiness without the risk of killing somebody. And if you really, really wanted to make it like, so it made headlines, you could even potentially stage some kind of cut that's covered up with a small skin-colored Band-Aid, so that when the shots go off, you can wipe off or pull off the Band-Aid, and then there's going to be active red spots, right? You would never actually shoot at the principal. That's what people don't understand about conspiracies, is that when you actually plan to carry out a covert action, you plan to carry out the covert action in the safest possible way. You don't run the risk of actually shooting the principal.
So, but let's play out the scenario that it was a conspiracy. So what could have happened there? And I was in an office the other day, one of the companies that I'm involved with, and there was a group of people gathered around a laptop watching the footage, and half of the people thought it was some kind of conspiracy, and that maybe he fell down and then like cut his own ear, and then the other half of the people thought that was craziness. What side of the fence do you sit on? You think it was a real shooter?
I think it was a real shooter. Mm-hmm. I absolutely think it was a real shooter. The principles that CIA teaches us about how to analyze a situation are twofold. They teach us how to analyze a situation, but they also teach us how to predict a conspiracy. And conspiracies have a very clear anatomy. They have a very clear process. All conspiracies start with something that is factual. Something really does happen. And then, immediately following the factual thing, there's a lack of information. Inside of that lack of information, the third piece of the puzzle is speculation. Now, speculation and suspicion are very close cousins. Suspicion is healthy, right? You've heard of healthy suspicion. Speculation is not healthy. Speculation is what it takes for you to create an answer to a story that's not based on facts, which is where the fourth element of a conspiracy comes from, a story that closes the loop. Because when there's information missing, it creates an open loop. Well, guess what human brains like? Conveniently closed loops. So we can't handle an open loop very well for very long. So then we start speculating on what might have happened until someone defines for us an answer, and then all of a sudden you have an answer that closes the loop and you have a conspiracy. Conspiracies happen all the time. Conspiracies happen in your own home. Who's the last one that who ate the last piece of bread, right? Who's the one that drank the last bit of milk? How are there no more eggs left in the refrigerator, right? Lack of information leads to speculation, and then we close the loop with a story in our mind. When you look at what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, there's all the elements for a conspiracy. There's facts, a lack of information, speculation, and somebody's closing the story loop. And all these different conspiracies are gaining momentum. But when you look at the factual analysis of what happened, there are pictures, there are diagrams, there's a corpse of a 20-year-old shooter holding a high-powered rifle on top of a roof aimed at the stage. There's reports of local sheriff and local police officers being notified of that. There's bystanders who have reported that. There's technology that's been employed to verify that. There's enough facts there to know that there really was someone who was young by name who took a shot at the president. That's what we know. Guess what happens tomorrow? We learn more. We don't have to know all the answers today. More information will come. Well, as soon as Donald Trump was shot, I called up one of my friends who's a retired Secret Service officer. And I said to him that from my point of view, from what I understand about close protection, everything was done pretty close to right. There's always gaps at any kind of political rally. That's why they're dangerous. You can't make it 100% secure. That's why there's snipers on the roof. There's not snipers on the roof because they feel like the grounds are safe. There's snipers on the roof because they know that there's gaps. There's not Secret Service on the sides of the stage carrying guns because they think that they're safe. There's Secret Service on the sides of the stage because they know that there's gaps. Of course there's gaps. You can't manage all risks. The person took a shot from over 400 feet. 400 feet is a long, difficult shot. Empirically, it's a long, difficult shot. Even though the newspapers come out and say it's a turkey shoot or an easy shot or a standard shot or a basic shot, it is not. Any hunter out there will tell you 400 yards is a difficult shot, and you have to have a high-powered rifle built for that kind of distance to shoot that length. So there's all kinds of misinformation that's going around as people try to spin up a story. So for me, it was a real assassination attempt by a real person whose motives are still unknown.
I was listening to something, and the person was saying that maybe this, the CIA or somebody infiltrated this young man and, encouraged him over a period of time to get up there on that roof and all these kinds of things. The heart of the problem here is we're quite distrusting and we don't have answers, and most of us aren't informed. So there's basically the small life that we live, and then above us we see like billionaires and powerful people, and we hear that they do or have historically done very nefarious, malicious things. And that becomes our sort of shed, is that we are the average person. And then up there, outside the shed, there's all these billionaires, powerful Illuminati, and they are doing these really malicious things. Now, in part, that's true, but maybe only in part. And we kind of assume this broad strokes approach to anything that happens. And we go government, matrix, conspiracy. The CIA does have history of doing things like this.
True. We're coming into a conversation that's twofold. One, we're talking about a pre-9/11 CIA. Pre-9/11, post-9/11 is important to create a distinction for CIA because prior to September 11th, CIA was a small, highly funded organization with very little oversight. They could come up with crazy stuff like trying to poison Fidel Castro so his beard fell out, or trying to create the Bay of Pigs invasion, or trying to do all sorts of wacky stuff from, MK Ultra to whatever else. That was a wacky, pre-9/11, unsupervised, Wild West kind of CIA. Post 9/11, The 9/11 Commission, written in 2003, highlighted that CIA failed to do its job for September 11th. So now there's tons of oversight. It's now a very large, very fat, well-funded bureaucracy, whereas before it was a well-funded free-for-all.
If it was a conspiracy, which department or which organization would be responsible, in your opinion?
If it was a conspiracy, there would be no department in charge of the conspiracy.
So it would be something else.
Correct.